Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you this evening to our third session in the Women Not Working webinar series. The first segment of this series has been all about managing the moment. My name is Deb Turcott. I'm the principal at Oriana Solutions, and on behalf of all of the speakers for the series, I just want to thank you for joining us. If you missed the first two sessions in the series, just want to let you know that you can email us at connect@orianasolutions.net, and we'll happily send you the video links for the first two sessions that were also about managing the moment. The first one was our kickoff, and the second one was about communicating your value. Tonight, when we speak about mental health, we are recording this session and playing the recording for you because it was best for our speaker tonight. So if you do have questions that we don't get to throughout the session, we just want to encourage you also to email us at connect@orianasolutions.net, and we'll be happy to get back to you with all of those answers. So without further ado, I'm going to bring us into our speaker for this evening. So Kim, I just thank you so much for joining us. Kim is a registered mental health counselor intern, and I had the distinct privilege of being Kim's boss at the University of Florida several years ago, where she was counseling doctorate students on how they were pursuing their education, as well as what they were going to do afterwards. And I can tell you and personally attest to her style that she is a totally nurturing human being, a fabulous counselor, and really has this pleasant way about helping people find their path and the rhythm that they need in that path. And so I'm grateful that Kim has chosen to spend some time with us tonight and share not only her talents, but her expertise and the pleasantries that come along with that from her. So Kim, if you wouldn't mind just for a minute, when I called you and said, Kim, will you join us in this webinar series? I really think that we could do something wonderful for women who've been impacted by the pandemic. What was it that inspired you to say yes?
Well, my first reaction when you described this series was, I want to listen to that series. That sounds great. Like, I want that in my life right now. And I was also honored that you had confidence in me to be able to contribute to this series in a meaningful way. It sounded like a challenge that I could incorporate into my life right now, which has changed during the pandemic, just like a lot of our viewers. It sounded like a challenge that was worthwhile, that I would have to incorporate something new in preparing for this, but also that it would be one of those little nudges that I could do right now. And also everything we're going to go over during this discussion is stuff that I use myself too, personally. And so at the very least, it's a great time to sit and go through these things in a meaningful way so that I can reconnect with them while I'm sharing them with other people and hoping that they can get something out of it too.
No, that's great. I appreciate the personal anecdote for you in that, you know, each one of us, no matter, I posted something on LinkedIn recently where I shared that doesn't matter how shiny someone's LinkedIn profile is, everyone needs encouragement. And I think your statement and your anecdote really speak to that no matter who you are or where you are, how experienced you may be, or whether you're a counselor or not, we all need a little help sometimes. And so it's great to be on this journey together. So thank you for doing this with us.
Thank you for having me.
So what would you say is the first step that our viewers could take as they're adapting their approach or approaching their mental health right now, considering everything that's going on for people?
Yeah, okay, so before we get into the first step, I wanted to give a little disclaimer, which is kind of similar to what you said at the beginning of your talk. There's going to be a lot that we go through, and I'm going to introduce things. This is an introduction, so I don't expect viewers to take everything we talk about and feel like it's just added to their to-do list of new things that they must do in order to be mentally healthy. My goal is to kind of expand your toolbox so that when you do feel like you need to visit it, you have even more resources to draw from. So if you take one thing from this discussion tonight, great. Even if you're just really exhausted right now and you just want to sit and listen to other people talk, I invite you to do that. That's okay too. But I hope that you take one or two things that stand out to you as we're talking. Take notes if you want to, but also just listen and see what stands out to you that you might want to try later on. So that's my disclaimer.
Great.
Moving, moving into what I see as the first step in approaching your mental health is, first of all, knowing that a lot of people, when they do think about mental health, if it's not a topic that you're comfortable with addressing, it can feel really intimidating because it's not as concrete as other aspects of our life. And so it's something that you're being affected by every day, regardless of if you've approached it in a specific way or not. But it might feel really new to form a relationship in an intentional way. So the first thing that we can do is observe what is already going on in your life. So by this, I mean, kind of taking some time without the pressure to make immediate changes, and think of yourself as almost observing yourself on a day-to-day basis, not just your actions, but what thoughts are popping up for you and how are you interacting with the different moments throughout your day. So for example, pay attention to your energy levels throughout the day. So some people are morning people, some people midnight is their time, and that's when their brain's working differently and they can do certain things. So you probably have some sense of what type of person you are when it comes to those types of things, but it might have shifted now that you've taken on new roles or things have changed in your life. So pay attention to your energy levels throughout the day. As you're doing this, when you're doing the observer part without the pressure to make changes, sometimes playing around with, having fun with it. If you feel like you want to pretend there's a narrator's voice kind of like observing you throughout the day, sometimes people love that because it's a way of interacting with, like, viewing what you're doing without feeling like you're gonna feel like all these feelings that come up when you notice what you're doing. Sometimes that can affect people in a way that makes them uncomfortable. So play around with it so that you can do this without judging yourself the whole time, if that makes sense. So pay attention to your energy levels. Also pay attention to areas that feel especially vulnerable to you throughout the day. So there might be parts of the day that you are really dreading, and maybe you don't even realize you're dreading it. But if you pay attention to what are you thinking and feeling leading up to this part of the day, what's your body doing? Really get inside your body, because we all react to stress differently. And sometimes, like, I'm someone who will hold my breath when I'm really stressed out without realizing it. So sometimes just noticing, like, oh, I was holding my breath when that was happening. Okay, that's good information, because maybe just reminding myself to breathe in those moments will make a subtle change. Some people, it's muscle tension that they get. So just paying attention to those physical aspects of what comes up for you throughout the day, that will give you a lot of good information to do something with later. But again, we're just collecting information in this first step. So I would also pay attention to when you interact with different people throughout the day. And this might be interactions that are in person. It might be members of your household. It might be people you're texting with or video chatting with or phone calls. Just kind of pay attention. If you know that's coming up, are you getting more tense or are you excited about that? Notice all of these little things and note them. So when you're taking these mental notes about yourself, it's okay to actually take literal notes too in a way that works for you. I encourage people to find a way that works for them. So some people like to keep a note on their phone and they'll just add anything that they notice throughout the day. Some people will like talk into their phone and add notes that way. Some people don't want to deal with that and they'll just remember it. It's totally up to you. You have to find a way that works for you, that feels approachable, so that you're more likely to actually do this instead of feeling like it's this big thing that is unapproachable for you. So once you come up with a way that feels comfortable to observe yourself and collect all of this information, you might want to pair it with like getting a glass of water. Every time you get a glass of water, you check in with yourself. Like, how am I feeling right now? Oh, my neck's tense, or I'm really thinking about this one thing I have to do later, even though I know there's 5 other things that I have to do between now and then. So that gives you good information that maybe certain tasks are kind of dominating your thought processes throughout the day. Also pay attention to times when you're feeling less stressed. And that's really good to know, collect information about too, because you can draw on that as a strength later on. So when you are collecting this information, you can do it for a day, you can do it for a week. It's whatever feels good to you when you feel like you have enough to start doing something with it. Notice patterns, notice if there are any trends. Once you do this, you will be able to start observing more intentionally on a regular basis. And I feel like this is the first step to approaching your mental health, but also it's something that you can take and adapt as things change. So we're dealing with all kinds of different new scenarios. Some people are working more than they usually do. Some people are out of work, and so they have more time than they usually do. A lot of people, when they have a lot of time that isn't structured, that can be a really intimidating space for them to be in. And certain thoughts and habits kind of fill that space and it doesn't feel good. And so they might be observing something totally different than the people who have now taken on extra work and are fitting different things in their day. So we're all coming from different places, but if you can get into the habit of this process of observing yourself, you can adjust it no matter what changes in your life. You can be like, okay, it's time to do some observations again and see what has changed. And maybe your reactions to different things have shifted over time.
So I find that so interesting. I'm thinking about your narrator concept, and that one especially resonates with me. But as a former athlete, for me, I'm thinking about it almost like a play-by-play commentator
Yes.
about my day. And so I don't know how many other former athletes there are that are interviewing tonight, but you know, that's sort of what resonated with me was like, oh, I can have this sort of play-by-play commentary happening to help me almost take this outside picture of myself and how I'm feeling and to observe myself throughout the day. So that's a really, really helpful tool for me personally, and I'm sure our viewers have found some others in what you've shared. But what I find when I feel like I'm paying more attention and I become more aware of something, it's easy almost to fixate on it or to become uncomfortable with feelings that come as a result of what we're noticing. So how do you recommend that viewers deal with the uncomfortable feelings or the anxiety that might come from this attentiveness or new sense of self-awareness based on the exercises you just talked about?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is a very uncomfortable process for a lot of people. Some people do get excited about it, but more often than not, I notice people are like, you want me to do what? You want me to pay attention to this stuff that I'm doing all day? So first of all, that's normal. So I want to normalize that for you. And also that's part of why I mentioned to not feel the pressure at first to make any changes whatsoever. Because if you also have that weight on you of, once I start paying attention, I'm going to have the pressure of making changes. And what if I don't know how to make those changes or what even needs to be changed? It kind of just removes that pressure from the experience. So all you have to do at first is collect information until you feel like you have enough to start with. And so as you notice those uncomfortable feelings, it can heighten your anxiety a little bit. And even if you've asked that pressure to kind of stay away, it'll still come in probably. So when that happens, some techniques that you might try to reduce anxiety, mindfulness. So mindfulness it basically means bringing attention and focus to what's happening in the moment. This isn't always something that people do very naturally. Some people are great at it naturally, but a lot of us, we're thinking about different things that aren't happening around us and anticipating tasks and responsibilities and stuff that we have to be prepared for later on. So you might need some practice exercising mindfulness before it becomes second nature to you. So there are so many different mindfulness techniques that you can try. It's actually, I find them really fun. My favorite like beginner mindfulness technique that I usually suggest people try is the 5 senses one. And this is where I recommend going outside if you can, but you can do it anywhere. You can be inside. So what you do is you start with sight and you identify 5 things that you can see in your surroundings. You try to find something that is probably not something you would focus on normally, but is there. And it's just kind of part of your background. So it might be a spot on the wall, or it might be a tree outside, something like that. And so when you're doing this, you're trying to really just focus on that one thing and hold your focus on it, notice stuff about it, get curious about it in that moment. So do that with 5 things that you can see. And then you move to 4 things that you can hear, and you do the same thing. Notice something in the back, or maybe it's a lawnmower, or maybe it's birds or something like that, that all kind of blends into the background typically, but you're specifically focusing on it intentionally in that moment. And then you move to 3 things that you can smell, and 2 things that you can touch, and then finally something you can taste. And so it doesn't have to take a long time to do this version of mindfulness technique. And it can be really relaxing. I do, like, now that we're talking about it again, I'm probably going to go do it today after I talk, because I'm realizing I haven't done this in a while and it sounds fun. But there are other ways to incorporate that. Maybe you drink coffee in the morning, and just making sure that when you're having that cup of coffee, you take a moment and focus on some of the sensations involved, like the sound of it pouring into the cup, the warmth of it on your hands. Anytime you can bring your brain's attention to those types of sensory things in the moment, that kind of like snaps you out of some of those other reels going on in your mind about thoughts that don't pertain to in that moment. And this is beneficial because it can give you kind of like a safe haven in the midst of all of these things that we're feeling pressure to be prepared for and perform in the future. So that's one example of mindfulness. But I encourage you to look up, you can just Google mindfulness techniques, and so many different versions will come up that you can try. So the next thing I would suggest to kind of combat some of these anxious feelings or uncomfortable feelings that pop up as you're observing yourself is movement of some kind. And movement's a tricky one, especially in our society. It can be paired with a lot of expectations like exercise. And I would encourage you to find some form of movement that feels fun and nice to you. I'm not saying, okay, now you got to start an exercise routine where you have to do it this many hours a week or whatever. Find some form of movement that feels nice and approachable. It might be going on a nature hike. It might be dancing, turning up some music really loud and just dancing in your kitchen. It's movement. It might be stretching. I really enjoy yoga, but I understand that a lot of people don't even have time to do a whole yoga routine in a day if their schedules are packed. So the thought of that might be like, yeah, that sounds nice, but when am I going to fit that in? Or I'm going to have to sacrifice sleep in order to get a yoga routine in. Take 2 minutes to do some stretches, something like that, that feels good and kind of get your body moving and brings that awareness back into your body and values that your body needs attention to, like you were saying. The next technique that I usually suggest people try is progressive muscle relaxation. This, you can look up a YouTube video. They have a lot of different videos that'll walk you through it the first time so you understand how it feels. But basically, you tighten different muscle groups and you release them and you kind of sync it with your breath. So it goes through different groups in your body. And by the end of it, it's kind of like it relaxes your body. It doesn't take very long. And it's kind of hard for anxiety to exist if your body has gone through a process that relaxes it like that. There's also meditation and guided imagery. There are apps for that. There are more YouTube videos. There's so many different resources out there. I'm not going to name anyone specifically, but if you need help finding any tools related to specific techniques, feel free to reach out to the email that Deb provided. But those are some examples of ways to get in your body and help combat anxiety kind of proactively, and also when you feel it surfacing. So it doesn't mean that it's going to make it disappear, but it'll make it a less desirable like atmosphere for the anxiety to exist if you're doing some of these things. And also sometimes people, like I said with the yoga example, you're like, I don't have time for this. I can't fit these things in. Find a little tiny space that you can fit them in. It might be where you least expect it. It might be right when you're getting into bed at night, you stop and take 1 minute to do something that feels physically relaxing. So it doesn't have to be 20 or 30 minutes long. It can just be throughout your day in small increments or even once a day.
I think that's really helpful, Kim. Thank you. I think of it almost like you're redirecting the energy in your body towards something different so that the anxiety can't take hold almost. And so, whether it's you I also don't want people to feel like you have to schedule the time. To your point, we find so many people who struggle with, creating time and space, especially if they are family members that they're caring for.
Mhm.
And so if that moment arises where you feel the anxiety creeping in, what a great time to use one of Kim's techniques that can really just sort of redirect that energy and kind of just let everything settle. I was trying to practice what you were saying while you were talking about the whole muscle tensing and then breathing, and I found myself out of sync. So I'm not going to keep trying that right now, but maybe later I'll try that again. But I thought that was a really interesting one I've never tried before. So thank you.
Yeah, and if you try it for the first time when you're not multitasking, once you are multitasking in the future, if you've done it enough, you might be able to do it more naturally because you've had that practice.
Yeah, that's great, because I was like, I need to stay focused on the webinar. If I keep relaxing, I'm going to lose my train of thought here. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Thank you for that. And, I'm thinking about how much change everyone's been facing, of course, over the last year. And almost everyone has faced some sort of change. But many women have had to take on additional roles or new roles. Think about the caring for family members or staying home to school children or virtual learning environments, virtual work environments. I mean, the list goes on and on of all of the things that we face that might be new or changing or added to the space that we've been, typically spending our time in. And I know I'm guilty of this. I think a lot of women really struggle with feeling like they have to do it all themselves, and that can feel really lonely. Mm-hmm. And so, what kind of suggestions do you have for women who are perhaps feeling isolated in their challenges, or perhaps either don't have a support system or may not recognize the support system that's present for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I would just want to acknowledge that women sometimes find themselves in these situations where they feel like they're doing it all alone because they have been trained to do that from various angles throughout their life. And sometimes they had to do that to survive. So we adapt because we need to, but sometimes things have changed and we can use new resources that we didn't even think existed. So it's a great time once again to kind of reevaluate what has changed now and what new resources do I have that I haven't even tapped into because I've been, just focused on getting the essential things done because I've been in survival mode for so long. Mm-hmm. So first of all, when you're doing all of that observing in step one that we talked about, observing who your support system is. And if you don't feel necessarily supported by them, maybe a different way of thinking of it is who do you interact with regularly? So this might be members of your household. It might be people who you communicate with long distance regularly. And first of all, focus some observation directly onto that. So members of your household, if you live with other people, how is that working out? Do you feel like there's communication that works? And if not, that's probably an area to focus on intentionally and kind of come up with a different approach to it. This can be really intimidating for a lot of people too. I know that a lot of times when I'm talking with clients about things that are stressing them out, a lot of stuff is relational, and they'll describe this happened, this person did this. And I'm like, okay, so you're telling me what you wish they did. Did you express this to them? And a lot of times it's no, or I don't know how, or I'm afraid if I do, this will happen. And so I would say this is a very important area. If you do nothing else, this could be an area to focus on so that you feel like you have more free communication with those that you're going to be interacting with a lot. I listened to Brene Brown's podcast, Unlocking Us, and she started it around February. So it's been one of my favorite little things to do during the pandemic is listen to that. And she had an episode where she talked about a plan she came up with her husband, where they, if you're each operating at a certain percentage each moment or each day. Like if you have had a rough day and you just want to like unwind and not have to take on new responsibilities, you might be at a 40%. Well, if you and your partner, for example, in this case, your percentages don't add up to 100%, like she was saying, then you are at a deficit. And so if that's the case, you need to first be able to communicate that with the other person in your household. And then you have to have a plan if that's the case, which might include, like she gave an example of, it might include prioritizing sleep instead of getting certain other things done until your combination is back up to 100%. So that's Brene Brown's like one little snippet of an example of how you might approach a communication plan with the people in your household. But you can get creative and see what works for you. There's also probably a need to reassess boundaries because your life might have changed during the pandemic. That means new boundaries might need to be constructed or shifted. A lot of times when people hear the word boundary, when it comes to relationships, they associate it with lack of connection or increasing the distance between them and somebody else or cutting off contact or something like that. It's actually kind of the opposite of that. It's making sure that each person feels like they have what they need in order to fully connect with the other person. So someone might need more space in between phone calls with a person who they're used to talking with more regularly. That doesn't mean they don't want to connect with the person anymore. That just might mean they want to be able to focus fully when they are talking to them. And that might have shifted depending on what their new responsibilities are lately. So kind of observing what boundaries you have in place and if they're working for you. And if you see a need for shifting them, maybe approaching the person you feel most comfortable talking to about this so that you don't set yourself up for a really uncomfortable conversation right out of the gate when you're approaching boundary talk. Talk to someone who you know is going to be warm and accepting of those new needs that you have, and practice expressing it to that person before you move on to people who might be a little more challenging. Sometimes there's resistance when people need new boundaries with their friends, family, support system, coworkers, whoever you're interacting with regularly. So quality over quantity, a lot of times needs to shift when you are feeling like you're taking on a lot of new responsibilities and navigating new roles that you're not used to.
That's really helpful. I was thinking about your examples and, sometimes it is the act of giving each other permission, right? So if
Yes.
we are in a relationship that, if it doesn't add up to 100%, I was just thinking about, almost saying, I need to give myself permission and say to my partner, I need permission to I'm not going to put the laundry away today. Like, I know it looks terrible in the bedroom, but sometimes it's the smallest things though, that can add up and create this compounding effect for us where we start to feel like we're losing some span of control in what's happening in our space. And that is so powerful to feel like, so thank you for giving me permission. I'm not going to put my laundry away tonight. So, I'm thinking too, Kim, we've talked about some great techniques, the communication plan, the observation, the mindfulness, but there's still this part of the journey where we can feel frustrated because our current circumstances don't match the plan we've put forth, right? Or the goals that we've set for ourselves. And, the phrase of, make a plan and it's just, to break it, sometimes plans just don't take shape the way that we hope for, but that creates a conflict and a sense of frustration for us. So how do you recommend that our viewers address that almost disconnect between their current circumstances and either the goals or the expectations that they have for themselves?
Yeah, so one of the themes I feel like that people have been dealing with, maybe a little more depending on the person, but collectively we've been dealing with more in the last year, it seems, is grief. And grief is tricky because a lot of times we associate grief with certain specific types of loss, but grief exists in all kinds of different transitions and losses. And there's been a lot of that in the last year for a lot of people. So acknowledging that grief is an area that I think is very valuable to make space for. If you don't even know where to start with that and you have no idea what you're even grieving, first of all, I've seen articles floating around in the last 6 months or so about ambiguous grief. That's a trend right now because ambiguous grief is when you don't even know, there's no final feeling that you're like, okay, this is this way, and now I have to grieve this because it's always going to be this way. We don't necessarily know what a lot of these areas that have suddenly become different in our life are going to look like in their final form. So one of the areas that people are grieving right now, for example, is consistency and being able to predict certain parts of their life that previously maybe was a little more predictable, and now it doesn't feel that way anymore. So if you don't, grief is very personal. And so you're going to have to come up with a way to process that grief on your own. However, one technique that I would suggest if you have no idea where to start is just get out a piece of paper and you can draw a line down the middle. Think about all the things that you're missing right now, or areas that feel like they're kind of, I call it sore. Like, do they feel sore? Are they achy, painful? And when you think of those things, on one side of the paper, put areas that feel like they are completely out of your control and you really can't see a way that you can influence it, at least not right now. Maybe it'll be something you can influence later, but in this moment, do you have any influence over this? Okay, put it on one side. That's the grief side. Then on the other side of the paper, you can put areas that maybe they feel intimidating and they generate stress, but is there some form of action you can take to influence them right now? Put them on the other side of the paper. That's the potential action side. So once you kind of go through these things, you will have two lists and you are probably going to approach them in different ways. The grieving side, you, like I said, you'll have to come up with a way that feels right for you to process that grief, and it's very personal. A lot of people have never intentionally approached their own grief, and it can be really intimidating at first, just like everything else we've talked about. So I usually suggest that people literally schedule a tiny amount of time that feels approachable to them. It could be 5 minutes to start out with. Most clients, when I talk to them about this, they have a fear that because they have never done this, it's going to open floodgates and it's going to take up some endless amount of time, and they're never going to be able to get back to their responsibilities because they're going to be crying or they're going to be a wreck and they just won't be able to come back to reality. Mm-hmm. So this is a common fear, first of all. Second of all, it might be a little bit of a floodgate the first time. So maybe give yourself some wiggle room when you first approach this. But I promise if you do make this part of an intentional, regular part of your life, it will not feel as overwhelming each time. It will be something that is easier to compartmentalize. Sometimes I like to think of grief, if you personify it, it's like a person who's been trying to tell you stuff for a long time. And every time you've kind of shut the door on them, if they get a glimpse of a way to give you some information real quick, they might be saying it really fast and yelling it at you. And it's, if you teach your grief to trust you that they will give you space, or you will give it space to say what it needs to say, then it'll learn to not take up as much time and space each time you sit with it. So if you don't know how to approach it, schedule 5 minutes to literally just sit with your grief and acknowledge that it's there and feel it. And be kind to yourself afterwards, because it can be exhausting and it can bring up stuff. Maybe, you know, if there's something you like to do to relax, like binging Netflix or going for that walk or talking to someone who you always feel really nice after you talk with them, schedule it for afterwards so that you have something relaxing to look forward to when you first approach your grief. So play around with it. It'll be something that you have to adapt and figure out how your grief needs to be tended to, but at least start the process. Then on the action side, that can be a really long list. So it's good to not just see it and be like, oh no, it's all on paper now. Like, look at all these things I have to do. I would encourage you to zero in on something that can be the most impactful by thinking, if you could wave a magic wand and one of those items would be resolved or fixed, what would it be? And sometimes that can give us really great information about what is taking up the most space for us in our minds. It might surprise you because sometimes it's not the item that seems like it should take up the most space. Mm-hmm. Like you might have something big at work that you're doing, but maybe the one thing that you would change if you had that magic wand was that your laundry system was working more smoothly, or that your garage was cleaned out, or the space in your house was organized, or you were avoiding having a conversation with someone who you needed boundaries with. So it'll be different for everybody, but try to remove those judgments of, well, that shouldn't be a big deal to me. I should be focusing on this big deal. well, it is a big deal to you. So focus maybe on that first, and you might realize that you have a lot more space after you've cleared that one thing that you would make disappear if you could.
I find that fascinating. First on the grief, we always think of grief as like capital G, right? Like loss of a human companion or a pet or something that we know would cause us to grieve, but there's sort of what I would call this lowercase grief that's happening.
Yeah.
And the ambiguous grief is just fascinating to me, that, the unpredictability. So it's almost like a perpetual sense of loss, because we don't know how to predict what comes next and when to expect change, or when to expect change to end. And the permission to grieve, that is, I think, a really powerful moment for each of us. And thinking about your action list is, when we talked about it in the top 10 list in the first session, it was, this isn't a whole list you have to accomplish everything. And so I really, it resonates with me, your point of, you've written all these things down, but pick the one, magic wand, as you said. And I'm thinking about the things I walk by in my house that take mental energy because I haven't gotten to them. And they're filling space in my brain and distracting me from other things that I could be doing, even though they're clearly not the most important things in my life, but they're consuming some of my energy. And so for me, that would be where my magic wand hits, because that's the thing that I can't walk by without thinking about it. And so really powerful examples. Thank you for that. And that brings me to, Kim, you and I are we're on different sides of the work, but we're both in a line of work where people call us for help, right? For you, they come to you for mental health counseling, they come to you for life coaching types of needs. On my end, it's usually professional coaching or leadership development, or maybe it's an organization or a business that needs help, but usually something triggers asking for that. Can you help our viewers understand, when does it make sense for them to reach out and seek professional help as it relates to their mental health?
Yeah, so I'm of the mindset that if you're even wondering, the answer is yes. Like, why not? Just try it. I think everyone should have a counselor at some point in their lives. So one thing to say that might motivate you to make that leap and just seek out a counselor and try it out and see how it feels is that once you are in that state of crisis where you're like, okay, I for sure need to talk to somebody now. First of all, it's going to be a lot harder for you to focus on the steps that it takes to locate a counselor, reach out to them, schedule, all of those things. Second of all, a lot of counselors will have wait lists. And so you might think, okay, this week I need to talk to somebody. Well, that person who you've found and it's like, this is my person, they might have a 6-month wait list. So it's great to focus on finding a counselor and then scheduling that session. And then you're established with them so that if you do need to revisit them in the future, a lot of times counselors will prioritize previous clients if you need to see them for maintenance sessions. So the way that you would go about finding a counselor, first of all, if you have a primary care physician, you can ask them for referrals. If you have the sense that you would need to, or you would be interested in exploring any form of medication, you're going to want to see a psychiatrist, or your primary care can also talk to you about that. So those are a couple of different routes that you might have in mind if you feel like medication is going to be part of your journey. Keep in mind that certain people can prescribe and others can't. You can talk to if you are employed, and you can talk to your employee's EAP and see if there's a way for you to see a counselor for a few sessions through your employer. That's a great place to start too, because it can give you an introduction without you having to find it all on your own and provide the money and resources for that. So you can do those things. You can also look at, there are various databases of counselors, and it kind of depends on where you're located, which ones are the most popular in your area. So you can do some Googling to see which databases appear the most in your state or city. And it's important to look for a licensed professional. And if they're not licensed, like me, I'm an intern, I have a licensed supervisor. So if they are an intern, make sure they have a licensed supervisor who they're working under. And you will need somebody who's licensed in your state. So those are some ways that you can begin to look for a counselor if you're interested in finding one.
And great advice to start early, right? And establish that relationship and set a baseline too for who you are and how you're feeling. And that way, if something does go awry or you're not feeling great at some point in time, or you really feel like you need help, you've also have this relationship built with someone who understands some of your journey and where you've been and where you want to go. So really helpful advice. So Kim, we're closing towards the end of our session. What do you hope our viewers are taking away from tonight? You've given us so much to think about and so many great techniques to consider. Like, what do you want people to walk away with tonight?
I want them to feel like they can at least approach the observation stage that we talked about in the beginning, without that pressure to make huge changes. But sometimes when you just observe, shifts start to occur with awareness. So that's kind of a first step. I hope they attempt to try that, even if it's in small increments. I hope that they try at least one anxiety reducing exercise. Some people like others more, or some more than others. So try a few if you want, but find something that you can always use in those moments that you've already practiced before, so that you feel like no matter where you are or what you're doing, you have those tools in your mind ready to try if you need it. And I really encourage you to communicate with your support system. Even if things seem to be going relatively smoothly now, it's never a bad idea to come up with a communication plan for if stress starts to increase with one or more people in that support system. Come up with a plan so that it doesn't become tense and hostile when things start to get a little more tricky with new responsibilities. And don't hesitate to seek professional help. There are so many reasons people see a counselor, and it's a brave thing to do, to reach out for help and try it. And I have a feeling that when people try it, they will be pleasantly surprised that there is a lot that they can use that space for. And it's not as intimidating as it seems. Sometimes people find a counselor who is a great fit right off the bat, but it's such a personal relationship. So even if you meet with a counselor, they don't seem like a great fit, please don't give up. There are so many different types of counselors, and it's really about fit. So just kind of like with hairstylists, some people, this is my hairstylist because they know how to deal with my hair. They might be great with someone else's hair, but you find the one that works for you.
No, I think that's excellent, Kim. And, we were talking about professional coaches in the first session during our top 10 list. And, I was suggesting that, it becomes a partnership. And so I think sometimes people stigmatize the need or the desire to work with a mental health professional, any type of a counselor. And the reality is, look at them as a partner in your journey, someone who can be there for you. And we all, especially in this year, we all recognize that it can be really helpful to not feel isolated, to feel like you've got someone who's partnering with you, whether that be on the mental health side or the career side, you name it. It's just great to have people in your camp. And that's exactly how I look at counselors, is you've got this partner in the journey with you to help you along the way. So really sage advice. And Kim, I want to thank you again for doing this with us. I mean, it's been so enjoyable to hear from you and to learn from you tonight. And, my big recommendation for folks tonight is, as you were talking about the things that you wanted them to take away, my encouragement to everyone tonight is to really get a piece of paper and a pen. And I've presented thousands of times, meetings, presentations, conferences, keynotes, you name it. But I find that when people actually write 2 to 3 things down at the end or during a session, they're more likely to either commit them to memory or to revisit them. And so my encouragement to you right now is to get a piece of paper and a pen and just write down a couple of things that feel powerful to you, that resonated with you tonight. It doesn't have to be a lot of words. It could just be dance in the kitchen, whatever it is for you that you took away from tonight, so that tomorrow morning when you wake up, it's not this albatross hanging over your head, like I have all these mental health things I need to do. But as opposed to that, it's just a short list that says, this really was meaningful to me. And this is something I can take away as part of my journey. and really help me manage the moment right now. So Kim, thank you again. This was just so wonderful, as I knew it would be. And I hope and know that our viewers are going to feel the same way. And for all of our viewers, again, if you missed the first 2 sessions, we just encourage you to email us at connect@orianasolutions.net and let us know that you'd like the video links to those. Or if you have additional questions for Kim, please also reach out to us at that email address at connect@orianasolutions.net. I know she's got other tips and techniques up her sleeve. So if we need to share more with you, we're happy to do that. The other thing that I want to mention to you is that we're going to take a little break now after this session for the height of the holidays and come back after the new year. So our next session will be January 6th with Amy Nichols, who's a vice president at the Humane Society of the United States. And she'll be talking with us about following your passion. How do you connect your career, your profession to a sense of purpose and meaning for yourself? So I know you're not going to want to miss that. So if you haven't RSVP'd, orianasolutions.net/women is where you can do that. And we hope to see you all on January 6th. Kim, thank you again. And we'll just wish everyone a happy holidays and have a great evening.